When I left the city behind, I thought I was finally free. No more honking horns outside my window at 2 a.m. No more ridiculous parking tickets or arguing with neighbors over inches of shared driveway. Just me, my land, and the kind of silence you can only find when civilization is miles away. Or so I thought. The first time I pulled into my new driveway, the tires of my truck crunching against fresh gravel, I actually smiled. This place, 10 acres of open space, tall trees swaying gently in the breeze, a wraparound porch with views that stretched for miles, was supposed to be my sanctuary. A fresh start. But the dream cracked before I could even unpack. I was halfway up the drive when a figure stepped out from behind a hedge like she'd been lying in wait, clipboard in hand, lips pursed so tight they could slice glass. She wore a cardigan that looked like it hadn't moved in a gust of wind since the Reagan era, and her expression screamed authority. "Excuse me," she barked, stepping directly into my path. "This road is for residents only." I blinked, confused. "I am a resident," I said slowly, rolling down the window. "This is my driveway." Her eyes narrowed as she glanced at the truck, then at me, then at the clipboard. "All access roads in this community fall under HOA jurisdiction. You can't just drive on them without prior approval." I let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "This is my land. I bought it. The previous owner even told me the road was private. No HOA involvement." She raised her chin. "I'm Veronica Hayes, president of the Meadowglen Homeowners Association. According to our guidelines, any property bordering the main community road must submit a formal request before using it for personal access." "And what if I say no?" I asked, my voice flat. Veronica gave me a thin smile. "Then you'll leave me no choice but to escalate." I should have taken that as a warning, but instead, I waved her off, muttering something about overreach and slammed the truck door behind me. Big mistake. The next morning, I stepped outside with a coffee in hand, ready to enjoy my first sunrise in peace. The sky was painted in oranges and pinks, the air still crisp with the chill of dawn. And then I saw them. Metal spikes. Dozens of them, shiny, sharp, and bolted into the gravel just beyond the edge of my driveway. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Who would? I walked closer. My boots crunched against the rocks, and my stomach turned as I realized what I was looking at. These weren't random scraps or debris. They were tire shredders, the kind law enforcement deploys in high-speed chases. Thick steel teeth anchored deep into the dirt with industrial-grade bolts. I stood there in stunned silence for a moment, heart pounding. It had to be her. Veronica Hayes. There was no one else who had even made contact with me yet, and she had made her intentions very clear. This wasn't just petty HOA drama. This was a calculated, deliberate act of sabotage. My pulse surged as I took out my phone and started snapping photos. Close-ups, wide angles, every screw, every spike. I made sure to get it all. Evidence. Then, without hesitation, I stormed down the road to her house. Her home sat at the corner of the street like it had been built just to observe and control the entire neighborhood. I pounded on her front door with the full force of my rage. A moment later, she opened it. Calm, smug, sipping coffee like she was enjoying a casual Sunday morning. "Can I help you?" she asked sweetly. "Are you insane?" I shouted. "You put spike strips in front of my house." She took a slow, deliberate sip. "I did warn you. This is criminal. You're damaging property, endangering lives. What if an ambulance needed to get through?" Her shrug was so casual it nearly pushed me over the edge. Rules are rules. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep it together. "I'm not going to the HOA board, Veronica. I'm going straight to someone who can do something about this." Her smile faltered. Good. I walked away without another word. But as I did, I caught her watching me from behind the glass, a flicker of concern in her cold eyes. Back at home, I uploaded every photo and video clip, documented the exact placement of each spike, and called the one person I knew who would take this seriously. Andrew Lee, my attorney. He picked up immediately. "Jack, what's going on?" "I've got a situation," I said, sending him the pictures. "You're not going to believe this." When he saw the photos, he let out a low whistle. "She really did this?" bolted them straight into the road, on my property. She just made a huge mistake, Andrew said. Property damage, illegal obstruction, public safety risk. We can bury her. Good. Because I wasn't backing down. What Veronica didn't realize was this. I had nothing left to lose, and she had just started a war she wasn't ready for. The letter was delivered the next morning. Thick ivory paper, sharp black ink. Andrew didn't hold back. It wasn't just a cease and desist. It was a legal hammer, citing property laws, safety violations, and a not-so-gentle warning that any further tampering with my land would result in criminal charges. I stood at my window, coffee going cold in my hand, watching as Veronica opened the envelope on her porch. She read it. Her expression didn't flinch, but her knuckles turned white as she gripped the paper. And then, just like that, she walked inside, shutting the door with the eerie calm of someone who was already plotting their next move. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was dread. Because people like Veronica didn't back down. They recalculated. And sure enough, it wasn't over. That night, I woke up to a strange metallic echo. Not loud, but just wrong enough to pull me out of sleep. I grabbed my flashlight and headed outside, half expecting to find raccoons near the trash bins. But what I found made my stomach drop. The spike strips were back, worse than before. This time, they weren't just bolted into gravel. Veronica, or whoever she hired, had poured concrete over the base of the tire shredders, embedding them like permanent landmines across the only road into my property. My hands shook with disbelief. The cement was still drying, steam rising from the surface in thin curls. The teeth glinted under my flashlight, jagged and deadly. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a message. This was war. I didn't bother knocking on her door again. I went straight inside, uploaded more footage, and called Andrew. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered as I sent him the new photos. "She poured concrete this time," I said. "This isn't just some HOA tantrum anymore. She's actively sabotaging access to emergency vehicles, mail, deliveries. Hell, even my right to come home." There was a pause. Then Andrew's tone shifted. "All right," he said coldly. "She just made this 10 times worse for herself. We're taking this to court." The next morning, I called the sheriff's office. I'd had enough. Within the hour, Sheriff Nolan himself pulled into my drive. He was a tall man with sun-creased skin, slow movements, and eyes that had seen more nonsense than anyone deserved. He stepped out of his cruiser, adjusted his belt, and whistled low as he walked toward the spike strips. "She really did it," he said, crouching to inspect the cement. "Jesus. These are law enforcement grade. This is serious." "She's trying to trap me on my own property," I said. "Or off of it," he muttered. "Either way, it's reckless endangerment. Let's have a word." We drove to Veronica's house. She opened the door wearing the same smug look, sipping from a mug that said, "Boss Lady." But when she saw the sheriff beside me, that smile faltered, just a hair. "Veronica Hayes," the sheriff said, "we need to talk about some spike strips." Her smile returned, brittle as old paper. "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding." "You poured concrete onto private property," I said. "This road serves the entire community," she replied smoothly. "You're not exempt from our guidelines." Sheriff Nolan held up a folder. "Property records say otherwise. Mr. Miller's driveway is fully outside HOA jurisdiction. You've committed an act of illegal obstruction and criminal damage." Veronica's face lost a shade of color. I was only enforcing standards. It was necessary." "Necessary doesn't mean legal," the sheriff snapped. "Now I'm going to need you to remove every inch of those strips. Immediately." "You can't be serious," she stammered. "I'm deadly serious," he said. "You either dig them out voluntarily, or we escalate this to criminal charges. Your call." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, arms stiff, jaw locked, Veronica walked past us toward the road. She didn't say a word as she grabbed a crowbar and began chipping away at the drying cement under the hot morning sun. Neighbors started to emerge, watching from porches and windows, whispering, filming. There she was, Veronica Hayes, self-proclaimed queen of Meadow Glen, red-faced and sweating as she clawed apart her own mess. I stood back, arms crossed, watching her downfall unfold one hammer strike at a time. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Veronica wasn't just about control. She was about pride. Humiliation wasn't going to stop her. It was going to fuel her. And I was right. Later that night, as I sat on the porch drinking a cold beer and trying to enjoy the brief moment of peace, I saw her again. Veronica. Marching door to door with that damn clipboard in hand, knocking on every neighbor's house like she was rallying troops. I could hear her voice drifting through the warm air, laced with fury. "We can't let this man threaten our values," she declared. "If we let him get away with this, he'll tear the whole community apart." I leaned forward, beer halfway to my lips. She wasn't backing down. She was recruiting, a new strategy, a silent war. But what she didn't know, what she never bothered to understand, was that this wasn't just about driveways or roads or rules anymore. This was about freedom. And I wasn't just fighting for mine. I was fighting for every neighbor who'd ever been too afraid to stand up to her clipboard, her fines, her threats. Because Veronica Hayes might have started this war in silence, but I was going to end it with thunder. It started with flyers, bright red paper tucked into mailboxes, taped to front doors, even pinned to the community bulletin board outside the general store. Emergency HO meeting, tonight, 7 p.m. Agenda, discussing the dangerous influence of Jack Miller. Dangerous influence. That was the phrase she chose. Like I was a cult leader or a ticking bomb about to tear Meadow Glen apart from the inside. I stood on my porch holding the flyer, staring at the words like they were a personal slap to the face. Veronica wasn't just rallying her forces. She was trying to put me on trial. Well, if that was the game she wanted to play, I wasn't going to sit back. I showed up early to the meeting hall. The place was buzzing with nervous energy. Neighbors I barely knew sat stiffly in folding chairs, murmuring among themselves, eyes darting between me and the front of the room. Some gave polite nods, others avoided my gaze entirely. Veronica stood at the front like she was addressing a court. She had her clipboard, a thick stack of printed documents, and that same icy fire in her eyes. "This man," she began, her voice rising over the quiet room, "has repeatedly defied the standards of Meadow Glen. He has refused to comply with our rules. He's brought in lawyers and law enforcement, undermining the unity of our community. Is this the kind of neighbor we want?" A few heads nodded. A few didn't. She flipped through her papers with dramatic flair. "Since his arrival, we've had conflict, complaints, and disruptions. He's endangered residents by refusing to respect community guidelines." I stood up slowly. My voice was calm, but it cut through the room like steel. "Are we really pretending this is about community safety? Or is it about control?" Murmurs rippled through the room. Veronica's jaw tightened. "This isn't about me," I continued. "It's about a woman who poured cement-anchored tire spikes into someone's driveway and called it enforcement, who tried to weaponize HOA power to punish someone for daring to ask questions." She interrupted, voice sharp. "We are all subject to the same rules, Mr. Miller. No exceptions." "You're right," I said. "So explain to us how illegal property damage, blocking emergency access, and trespassing at night are rules you expect the rest of us to follow too." A voice cut in from the back. It was Henry Brown. He stood slowly, his cane tapping against the wooden floor, and faced the room. "I've lived here for 27 years, he said. "Seen plenty of folks come and go. But I've never seen anyone do what she did to Jack. And I've never had the courage to say this until now. Veronica, you've made life here miserable for a long time." Gasps. A few people looked down at their laps. Others straightened up as if suddenly remembering the many violations they'd quietly endured under Veronica's reign. "You fined my wife for having potted plants," Henry said, voice trembling slightly with age and anger. "You threatened the Johnson kids for chalk drawings on their own sidewalk. You made my daughter cry because her fence was 2 inches too high. And now this?" Veronica's face turned red. Those were legitimate infractions." "They were petty," someone else muttered. "Abusive," another added. The dam cracked. Voices rose, neighbors speaking out, one after another, sharing stories they had been too afraid to tell until now. Veronica tried to shout them down, but her voice was lost in the rising wave of resentment. Finally, the HOA president, a quiet man named Greg Wilkins, raised a hand. Enough. The room fell silent. Greg looked tired, resigned. But for the first time, he looked done. Veronica, he said softly, are you seriously standing here and casting yourself as the victim after everything you've done? I was upholding the rules, she tried. You were enforcing your version of them, without empathy, without fairness, and now you've crossed a line too far. He turned to the room. All those in favor of removing Veronica Hayes from her position as president of the Meadow Glen HOA, raise your hand. The room lit up with hands. It wasn't even close. I stood still, watching the final seconds of her grip on power crumble before her eyes. Veronica looked around like she couldn't believe what was happening, like she had expected fear, silence, obedience. But all she got was a wall of blank stares and lifted hands. By the time the vote ended, she had no clipboard, no title, no power. Greg cleared his throat. Effective immediately, you are stripped of all HOA authority. Any further actions taken in the name of this board will be considered unauthorized. And just like that, Veronica Hayes, the woman who thought she ruled Meadow Glen, was dethroned. I should have felt triumphant. But I didn't. Because people like her didn't go quietly. And that night, my instincts proved right. It was nearly midnight when I heard shouting from outside. I flicked on my porch light and stepped out barefoot into the cool night air. There she was, standing in the middle of the street, fists clenched, face twisted in fury. She was screaming at my neighbors, at anyone who would listen. "You're all cowards," she shrieked. "After everything I've done for this place, you side with him, a stranger, an outsider." Frank, the retired schoolteacher who lived 2 houses down, stepped forward calmly. "Veronica," he said, "you did this to yourself." Her eyes scanned the neighborhood, once her kingdom, and landed on me. "You think this is over?" she shouted, storming toward my porch. "You think you've won? You ruined everything. I'll make sure you regret ever stepping foot here." I stood firm. "You're trespassing," I said. "Walk away before you make this worse for yourself." She smirked. But it wasn't the smug kind anymore. It was something darker. "Oh, you haven't seen worse yet." And with that, she vanished into the dark. A chill settled in my chest. Because I believed her. She wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. It happened just before dawn. I stepped out onto the porch with a mug of coffee, expecting to see my old truck sitting peacefully at the end of my gravel driveway. Same as always. The sky was still dark, only faint streaks of lavender peeking over the horizon, but something felt off. I rubbed my eyes, took a few steps forward, then froze. The truck was gone. For a second, I thought maybe I'd left it at the hardware store or maybe parked it behind the shed, but deep down I already knew. It wasn't missing. It had been taken. I sprinted inside and pulled up the footage from my outdoor security cameras, fingers trembling more from fury than fear. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m. The video loaded, grainy at first, and then there it was. A tow truck. No markings, no lights. And next to it, standing like a dark silhouette against my front yard, Veronica Hayes. She was wearing a long coat, arms folded, watching with that same twisted smirk she'd worn the day she installed the concrete spikes. My truck, still warm from being parked just hours earlier, was lifted and hauled away like it was junk in a scrapyard. She didn't flinch once. I didn't even hesitate. I grabbed my phone and dialed the sheriff's direct line. "Sheriff Nolan," came the groggy voice on the other end. "It's Jack," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "My truck was stolen last night. I have footage, and I know exactly who took it." There was a pause. Then his voice turned sharp. "I'm on my way." 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up to my property. Nolan stepped out, already rubbing sleep from his eyes but alert the second I showed him the video. "She hired a tow truck?" he asked, brows furrowed. "No court order, no report, no legal basis?" "None," I said flatly. She's losing it, he muttered. Where would she even take it? I've got an idea, I replied. There's a private impound lot 5 miles out. It's not city-run. She probably pulled strings with someone she knew there. Nolan nodded. Let's go get your truck. The impound lot sat behind a rusted chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A small office stood near the gate, where a man in grease-stained overalls stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. Something in his squint told me he already knew why we were there. Can I help you? He asked. Yeah, the sheriff said, nodding toward the locked yard. That blue Ford F-150. Was it brought in last night? The man scratched his beard. Came in around 3 a.m. Some HOA lady said it was parked illegally. On private property, I cut in. My private property. The man sighed, clearly annoyed. Look, we just get the call. If it's an impound request and they sign the form, we tow. I don't want any trouble. You'll get a lot more than trouble if you don't cooperate, Nolan warned. This was an illegal repossession. If you want to avoid charges, I suggest you open that gate and waive the fee. The guy raised both hands. Fine. Just take it. Keep that crazy woman away from me. The gate creaked open, and there she was. My truck, unharmed. But the sight of it in that yard, like it had been caged, stirred something deep inside me. It wasn't just about the truck. It was about principle. And now, it was time to finish this. We didn't call ahead. We drove straight to Veronica's house, my truck right behind the patrol car. Nolan and I walked up the front steps, and I swear I could hear her inside, humming some twisted little tune. She opened the door with a self-satisfied grin, but the second she saw Nolan, her smile cracked. Veronica Hayes, he said sternly. We need to talk. Her eyes darted to me, then back to him. Is this about... I didn't let her finish. I held up my phone, playing the video of her standing next to the tow truck, arms crossed proudly as my vehicle was hauled away. You stole my truck, I said. That's grand theft auto. Her face drained of color. It wasn't theft. It was community enforcement. I filed a notice with the HOA. You have no authority over my property, I snapped. That board stripped you of your title. You don't represent anything anymore. What you did is a felony. I didn't know. You did, Nolan said, cutting her off. You planned it. You hired a private company. You trespassed in the middle of the night and committed theft. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish gasping for air. This is ridiculous. You can't arrest me over this. Yes, I can, he said, reaching for his cuffs. Turn around. No, wait. Now. He cuffed her right there on the porch, in front of neighbors already peeking through curtains and opening doors. Phones were recording. Whispers filled the air. Veronica Hayes, once Queen of Meadow Glen, was being hauled away like a criminal. She thrashed in protest as Nolan guided her down the steps. You'll regret this, she screamed. I'll get a lawyer. I'll sue. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed, watching her meltdown with a slow smile. Good luck with that, I said calmly. I already have a lawyer, and he's a hell of a lot better than yours. The cruiser door slammed shut, cutting off her voice. And just like that, the woman who made it her mission to destroy my peace had destroyed herself instead. In the days that followed, the HOA scrambled to clean up the mess. Official statements were posted on every platform they could find. The HOA does not condone the recent actions of former member Veronica Hayes. We had no prior knowledge of the illegal towing incident and remain committed to maintaining a fair and respectful community. Blah, blah, blah. They could distance themselves all they wanted. The damage was done. Veronica was charged with vehicle theft, trespassing, reckless endangerment, and false impersonation of authority. She faced fines, lawsuits, and a permanent stain on whatever reputation she thought she had left. But most importantly, she was gone. No more threats. No more flyers. No more tire spikes or screaming at neighbors in the street. For the first time since I'd arrived, I had peace. And this time, it was earned. The morning after Veronica's arrest, something changed. It wasn't just the air, though it felt cleaner, lighter, like the neighborhood had exhaled for the first time in years. No, it was in the silence. A silence without tension, without threats. For the first time since moving to Meadow Glen, I stepped out onto my porch without that tight coil in my chest. No clipboard-wielding tyrant waiting at the end of the driveway. No concrete spike traps. No more games. Just the wind, the birds, and the soft sound of gravel under my boots as I walked toward the road. Clear and safe, once more. The damage Veronica had done was more than physical. It was psychological. For years, she'd ruled through intimidation, exploiting the fine print in rulebooks and the fear in people's hearts. She didn't need permission, just silence. But silence is fragile, and once it breaks, it never returns the same. That evening, neighbors began to show up, one by one. Frank brought over a six-pack. "Thought you might want to celebrate," he said. "You earned it." Behind him came Henry Brown and his wife, with fresh-baked cookies wrapped in foil and quiet gratitude in their eyes. A younger couple I hadn't spoken to before introduced themselves as Rachel and Mark. They brought a potted plant and said they were sorry they hadn't spoken up sooner. It wasn't about the gifts, it was what they represented. A turning point. People who had once kept their heads down were now looking up, speaking out, standing taller. The fear Veronica planted had rotted out of the soil. And it wasn't because I was special. I wasn't braver or smarter. I just refused to be quiet. That's what did it. That's what changed everything. Later that night, I stood in the middle of my driveway with a hammer and a wooden signpost. I pounded it into the dirt, lined it up perfectly, and stepped back to read the words I had carved myself. Freedom doesn't come from following rules. It comes from standing up when the rules are wrong. I didn't put it there for me. I put it there for anyone who came after, for the next newcomer who might get bullied by someone like Veronica, for the kid riding a bike who didn't color inside the lines, for the old man with too many garden gnomes on his lawn. It was a reminder that some things are worth fighting for. 2 weeks passed. Veronica remained in custody, awaiting trial. Rumor had it she'd lawyered up with a third-rate attorney who spent more time arguing technicalities than apologizing for criminal behavior. The HOA washed their hands of her entirely. Her house sat dark, empty. Her porch stripped of the patriotic flags and HOA bulletins she used to decorate it with religious zeal. The neighborhood changed. Lawn inspections disappeared overnight. Fines were paused indefinitely. The HOA board began reevaluating its charter, holding community forums, asking for feedback instead of issuing demands. People started planting flowers in mismatched pots. Kids chalked colorful drawings on sidewalks again. Someone even painted their mailbox blue, a color Veronica had once deemed non-compliant. This time, no one objected. They complimented it. Freedom didn't just return, it blossomed. One quiet afternoon, as I sat on my porch with a book and a cold drink, Andrew Lee pulled into the driveway. He stepped out of his car with a satisfied grin and a thick file in hand. "Got the final paperwork," he said, waving it. "You're officially cleared of every complaint, code violation, and so-called infraction Veronica ever filed." I chuckled. Took long enough. "She picked the wrong guy to mess with," he smirked. I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the guy who almost gave up after the spike strips?" He shook his head. "You didn't give up. That's what matters." He was right. There were moments I wanted to pack it all in, sell the house, disappear. But every time she tried to push me out, every time she tried to corner me with rules and fear, I pushed back harder. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew if I gave in, she'd do it to the next person, and the next, and the next. That night, I sat on the porch again. Same spot, same breeze. But this time, I wasn't waiting for conflict. I was watching peace. The sun dipped below the hills, casting everything in a soft orange glow. Porch lights flickered on across the neighborhood. Kids laughed in the distance. A dog barked joyfully. Someone was grilling, maybe Henry. The smell of charcoal drifted on the wind. And as I sat there, I realized something important. This wasn't just about property lines or legal letters or even HOA power struggles. It was about boundaries, the kind you draw around your dignity, your values, your right to exist without being controlled. It was about knowing when to speak up, when to take a stand, and when to stop asking for permission. Because peace isn't something you get handed. It's something you defend. Epilogue. Veronica Hayes was found guilty on multiple counts, including trespassing and theft. Her sentencing included community service and a restraining order that permanently banned her from setting foot in Meadow Glen again. The HOA board, under new leadership, revised the charter to include homeowner rights protections, with one clause inspired directly by my case. And as for me, I stayed. Not because I won, but because this place, my place, was finally becoming what I'd always dreamed it could be. Home. Closing message, voiceover style. Sometimes the fight for peace feels like war. But don't let fear make you small. Don't let silence become your prison. Because the moment you stand tall, no matter how loud the enemy shouts, that's the moment you start to win. This wasn't just a story about HOA abuse. It was about persistence, about drawing the line and saying, enough, no more. And if you're facing your own version of a Veronica, remember, you are not alone. Speak up, push back, stand your ground, because peace is worth the fight. Absolutely. Here's a 300-word concluding paragraph in English, written to be smooth, emotionally engaging, and thought-provoking. It wraps up the story while offering a deeper life lesson and encouraging viewers to interact with the StoryForge channel. Sometimes, the battles we fight aren't on grand stages or against armies. They happen in driveways, in silence, behind closed doors, and within the choices we make every single day. Jack's story wasn't just about one man versus a corrupt HOA leader. It was about what happens when an ordinary person refuses to be pushed around, refuses to let injustice hide behind bureaucracy, and chooses to stand tall even when it's easier to walk away. In a world full of Veronicas, people who abuse power, who manipulate systems, who thrive on silence, what matters most is your voice, your persistence, your refusal to back down when the rules stop making sense. Because the truth is, the most powerful act of resistance isn't shouting, it's enduring. It's knowing your worth and defending it with calm, focused courage. So whether you're dealing with a difficult boss, an unfair system, or just that voice in your head telling you you're not strong enough, remember, peace is not passive. It's earned. And once you fight for it, it becomes something no one can take away from you. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever stood up to someone who tried to control your life? What gave you the strength to push back? Drop your story in the comments below and let's keep this conversation going. And if you found value in this journey, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and follow the StoryForge for more true stories that empower, uplift, and remind you that even in the smallest moments, you hold the power to forge your own path. Because every story has a spark. What will yours ignite?